The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Sofia Martinez's corner office, casting long shadows across her mahogany desk. At 42, she had everything she'd ever dreamed of: a stellar career as a senior financial analyst at Preston and Rhodes, a beautiful home in the suburbs, and most importantly, a loving marriage to Eric, her partner of 15 years. Sofia smiled, touching the fresh orchid on her desk, Eric's anniversary gift from last week. He always remembered the little things, even with his demanding schedule as lead architect at Thompson & Associates. Their relationship had been her anchor through the cutthroat world of high finance, where every decision could make or break million-dollar deals. The gentle ping of her email pulled her attention back to her computer screen. Another confidential report on the Morgan acquisition, a deal that could reshape the entire banking sector. Sofia had spent months analyzing every detail, ensuring their firm would come out on top. The stakes were astronomical, with potential profits in the billions. Coffee? Karen, her assistant, appeared at the door with Sofia's usual morning Americano. "You're a lifesaver," Sofia said, taking the steaming cup. "Any word from the Morgan team?" Karen shook her head. "Nothing yet, but Mr. Green wants to see you at 11. He seemed anxious." Something in Karen's tone made Sofia pause. Theodore Green, her direct superior, had been acting strange lately: cancelled meetings, hushed phone calls, nervous glances. Initially, she'd attributed it to the pressure of the Morgan deal, but now. Her phone buzzed, a text from Eric: "Great news. Just landed huge contract with Apex Industries. Celebrating tonight?" Sofia's blood ran cold. Apex Industries, the same company that had been aggressively pursuing the Morgan acquisition. The same company she'd been analyzing for months, sharing her concerns with Eric during their late-night conversations. "Tell Mr. Green I'll be there," Sofia said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She opened her secure database, scrolling through months of analysis. The patterns jumped out at her now, subtle shifts in Apex's strategy that aligned perfectly with her confidential assessments. Her office phone rang, displaying an unknown number. "Mrs. Martinez?" a distorted voice asked. "I believe we need to talk about your husband's gambling debts." Sofia's world tilted on its axis. "Gambling debts? Eric?" The voice continued, "Check the joint account statements from the past year." "And Mrs. Martinez? I'd be careful about the Morgan report you're preparing. Some information isn't meant to be shared." The line went dead, leaving Sofia staring at her reflection in the darkened computer screen. The woman looking back at her seemed like a stranger, successful, confident, completely unaware that her perfect life was built on quicksand. With trembling fingers, she pulled up their joint account statements. Error after error appeared: transfers she'd never authorized, withdrawals from casinos, loans she'd never known about. The numbers blurred as tears filled her eyes. The orchid on her desk suddenly seemed to mock her with its perfect symmetry. How many other perfect things in her life were illusions? She thought of Eric's late nights at the office, his recent insistence on handling their finances, the subtle changes in his behavior. A knock on her door made her jump. Karen stood there, concern etched on her face. "Mr. Green's meeting has been moved up. He says it's urgent." Sofia straightened her spine, years of corporate training kicking in. She would handle this the way she handled every crisis, with precision and control. But as she gathered her files, a single thought echoed through her mind: in a world built on lies, who could she trust? She stepped into the hallway, feeling the weight of unseen eyes. The Morgan report felt heavy in her hands, a ticking time bomb of secrets and betrayals. The elevator doors opened, revealing Mr. Green's nervous face. As she stepped inside, Sofia made a silent vow: she would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The elevator began its ascent, each floor bringing her closer to a confrontation that would shatter her carefully constructed world. Behind her, Mr. Green shifted uncomfortably, and Sofia caught a glimpse of his phone screen, an email from Apex Industries. Sophia's hands gripped the leather portfolio as she followed Mr. Green into the conference room. The morning sun that had seemed so promising now felt harsh and exposing. Through the glass walls, she could see Manhattan's skyline, a vista she'd once found inspiring, but now seemed to mock her with its indifference to her crumbling world. "Close the door, please," Mr. Green said, his voice unusually tight. He hadn't made eye contact since the elevator, and his typical confidence had been replaced by an anxious energy that set Sophia's nerves on edge. She remained standing, instinct telling her to maintain whatever advantage she could. "What's so urgent, Theodore?" He loosened his tie, a nervous habit she'd noticed over their years working together. "The Morgan analysis, there are concerns about potential leaks. Information that shouldn't be in circulation somehow made its way to our competitors." Sophia felt her professional mask slipping. The words of the anonymous caller echoed in her mind, mixing with the damning evidence she'd discovered in her bank statements. "What kind of information?" "Proprietary data. Risk assessments. The exact same concerns you raised in your preliminary report." He paused, studying her face. "Sophia, is there something you need to tell me?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Sophia thought of Eric, of their morning kisses and shared dreams, of the life they'd built together. Had it all been a calculated move in some larger game? She thought of the countless nights she'd spent discussing her work with him, trusting him completely. "I need to make a call," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Green nodded, relief flashing across his face, perhaps grateful for the momentary reprieve. In the privacy of her office, Sophia dialed Eric's number. Each ring felt like an eternity. When his voicemail answered, she wasn't surprised. It fit the pattern of lies she was beginning to uncover. Her computer pinged, an email from an anonymous account. Inside was a video file. With shaking fingers, she pressed play. The footage showed Eric entering a private room at the Golden Palace Casino, followed by a man she recognized as James Chen, Apex Industries' chief financial officer. The timestamp was from 3 months ago, exactly when Eric had claimed to be at an architecture conference in Vegas. The pieces were falling into place with devastating clarity. The gambling debts weren't just about addiction, they were about access. Eric had used her trust, her love, her confidential information to dig himself out of a hole. Or had that been the plan all along? Her desk phone rang again, the same unknown number as before. This time, she was ready. "Mrs. Martinez," the distorted voice began, but Sophia cut it off. "Who's blackmailing my husband?" A pause. Blackmail is such an ugly word. Let's call it leverage. Mr. Martinez made some unfortunate choices. We merely helped him see the opportunity in his situation. And the opportunity involved betraying his wife. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. "Business is business, Mrs. Martinez. Your husband understood that. The question is, do you? The Morgan report you're preparing, it would be a shame if certain inconsistencies were to come to light. Your reputation, your career." The threat hung unfinished. Sophia glanced at the framed photos on her desk, her and Eric on their wedding day, at their dream house closing, celebrating her last promotion. Each memory now felt tainted, each smile masking a lie. Her office door opened, and Karen stepped in, her face pale. "Sophia, Mr. Green is asking for the Morgan report. And Eric is here." Through the glass walls, Sophia saw him, her husband of 15 years, the man she trusted with every secret, every dream, every vulnerability. He was wearing the blue tie she'd given him for his birthday, and for some reason, that small detail broke something inside her. "Tell them I'll be right there," Sophia said, her voice distant to her own ears. She opened her drawer, removing a small USB drive, her personal backup of every analysis, every transaction, every piece of evidence she'd gathered over the months. As she stood, Sophia caught her reflection in the window. The woman staring back at her wasn't just hurt, she was angry. And anger, she decided, was better than despair. The walk to the conference room felt like a march to execution. But with each step, Sophia felt her resolve hardening. They had underestimated her, all of them. They thought they could use her love against her, turn her trust into a weapon. Eric stood as she entered, his face a mask of guilt and desperation. "Sophia, please, I can explain everything." Behind him, Mr. Green shifted uncomfortably, and through the glass, she saw James Chen from Apex Industries stepping off the elevator. The stage was set. The players were in position. And Sophia Martinez was done being a pawn in someone else's game. The conference room felt like a pressure chamber, emotions condensing in the air until breathing became difficult. Sophia stood at the head of the table, the Morgan report untouched before her, studying the faces of the men who had conspired to destroy everything she'd built. Eric reached for her hand, but she stepped back, the small movement speaking volumes. In his eyes, she saw the desperate plea of a drowning man willing to pull others down with him. How had she missed the signs? The late-night phone calls he took in the garage, the sudden business trips, the way he'd gradually isolated her from their joint finances, all under the guise of taking care of everything. "Before anyone speaks," Sophia said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart, "I want to understand something. When did it start, Eric? Was any of it real, or was I just a convenient mark from the beginning?" James Chen shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Mr. Green stared at his hands. The weight of their silence pressed against her chest like a stone. "It wasn't like that," Eric's voice cracked. "The debts, they started small. Just a few games, nothing serious. But then the housing market crashed, and projects fell through. I thought I could fix it myself. I didn't want to worry you." Sophia felt a bitter laugh rise in her throat. "Worry me? I'm your wife, Eric. We promised to share everything, the good and the bad. Instead, you shared my confidential information with strangers. You turned our marriage into a transaction." The words hung in the air like shards of glass. Through the window, she could see Karen at her desk, watching the scene unfold with worried eyes. Karen, who had noticed Sophia staying later at the office, who had started leaving domestic violence resources on her desk, subtle, deniable, but present. Had her assistant seen the truth before she had? "Mrs. Martinez," Chen cleared his throat, "perhaps we can discuss this privately. There's no need for this to become messy. Arrangements can be made that benefit everyone." Sophia turned to him, seeing clearly now the predator beneath the polished exterior. "Benefit everyone? Like how you benefited from my husband's desperation. How you used his gambling debts to leverage insider information." Mr. Green stood abruptly. "Sophia, please. Think about your career. About your future." "My future?" She opened her laptop, typing in a command. "Let's talk about futures, shall we? About how Apex Industries has been using insider information to manipulate market positions. About the offshore accounts where the profits from these trades have been accumulating." Eric's face went pale. "How did you?" "I'm good at my job, Eric." "Very good. Did you think I wouldn't notice the patterns? That I wouldn't investigate when things stopped adding up?" She turned to Chen. "Your mistake was assuming I shared everything with my husband. That the information he passed along was complete." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Sophia felt a strange sense of calm, like a swimmer who had finally stopped fighting the current. "The SEC has received copies of everything I've uncovered. Every transaction, every connection, every piece of evidence pointing to systematic fraud." She met each man's gaze in turn. "But there's still time. Time for truth, for accountability." Eric slumped in his chair, the facade of the confident architect crumbling. "I never meant. I thought I could protect you." Provide for you the way you deserved. Protect me. Sophia's voice softened, not with forgiveness but with understanding. You don't protect someone by lying to them. By stealing their trust. By turning their love into a weapon against them. Karen appeared at the door. Sophia. The SEC agents are here. They're waiting in the lobby. The news hit the room like a thunderclap. Chen reached for his phone, but Sophia shook her head. They already have everything. Running will only make it worse. She gathered her things, each movement deliberate and controlled. At the door, she paused, turning back to Eric. You know what hurts the most? Not the lies, not even the betrayal. It's that you thought so little of me, of our marriage, that you believed I couldn't handle the truth. That I wouldn't have stood by you if you'd just been honest. Footsteps in the hallway signaled the approaching agents. Sophia straightened her spine, ready to face whatever came next. But as she watched the men who had tried to break her being led away in handcuffs, she realized something profound: they had failed. She was still standing, still fighting, still true to herself. Through the window, she saw the city stretching out before her, its edges softened by the afternoon light. Somewhere out there, a new chapter was waiting to be written. But first, she had to face the hard truths, the painful conversations, the slow process of rebuilding, not just her career, but her sense of self. Karen touched her arm gently. Your sister called. She says the guest room is ready whenever you need it. Sophia nodded, grateful for the reminder that she wasn't alone. That even in the midst of betrayal, there were still people she could trust. The thought gave her strength as she prepared to face the questions, the investigators, and the long road ahead. The guest room in Rachel's apartment felt both foreign and familiar, like a childhood memory viewed through adult eyes. Sophia sat on the edge of the bed, holding a cup of chamomile tea that had long since gone cold. Outside, New York's evening symphony of sirens and street noise created a strange lullaby, so different from the suburban silence she'd grown accustomed to. You haven't touched your tea, Rachel said from the doorway. Her younger sister's face carried the same worried expression she'd worn since picking Sophia up from the office 3 days ago. Want to talk about it? Sophia traced the rim of the cup with her finger. I keep thinking about the signs I missed. The way he'd check my phone when he thought I was sleeping. How he'd tell stories about our finances that never quite added up, but I trusted him because that's what wives do, right? Trust their husbands. Rachel crossed the room and sat beside her, close enough for comfort but not touching. She'd always known exactly what Sophia needed. No, that's what abusers want their victims to believe. Trust isn't blind faith, Sophia. It's earned. The word abuser hit Sophia like a physical blow. She'd spent the last 3 days giving statements to SEC investigators, meeting with lawyers, freezing accounts, but somehow this simple truth had eluded her. Financial abuse was still abuse. The betrayal of trust was still violence, even if it left no visible bruises. Karen came by the office today, Sophia said, changing the subject. Brought me some files I needed for the investigation. She said. Her voice cracked. She said she used to work at a domestic violence shelter. That's why she started leaving those pamphlets. She recognized the patterns before I did. Because you were too close to see it, Rachel responded gently. Remember when I was dating Mark in college? How everyone saw the red flags except me. Sophia remembered. She'd been the one to help Rachel pack in the middle of the night, to drive her to a new city, to help her rebuild. Now their roles were reversed, and the irony wasn't lost on her. Her phone buzzed, another message from Eric. She'd blocked his number, but he kept finding new ways to reach her. Email addresses, mutual friends, even sending letters to her office. Each message followed the same pattern: desperate apologies, promises to change, reminders of their happy memories, and finally, veiled threats about what might happen if she didn't drop the investigation. I made an appointment, Sophia said quietly, still staring at the phone. With Dr. Patterson. The therapist you recommended. Rachel's smile was warm and free of judgment. I'm proud of you. I'm not. I'm not broken, Rachel. I don't need fixing. No, you don't. Therapy isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about understanding your strength, about processing trauma so it doesn't define you. Sophia stood, walking to the window. The city lights blurred through her tears, creating halos of gold and silver. I keep thinking about the women at work. The ones who came to me for mentoring. I preached about financial independence, about standing up for yourself, about not letting anyone undermine your worth. What a hypocrite I turned out to be. Stop. Rachel's voice was firm. You're not a hypocrite. You're a survivor who's choosing to fight back. Do you know how many women you're helping by standing up to them? By refusing to be silenced? The investigation was gaining momentum. Other victims had started coming forward, more spouses manipulated into sharing confidential information, more lives derailed by carefully orchestrated schemes of debt independency. Sophia's testimony would be crucial in bringing down not just Eric and Chen, but an entire network of predators who turned trust into profit. A text from Karen lit up her phone, meeting tomorrow with the forensic accountants. You're not alone in this. We've got your back. Sophia felt something shift inside her, not healing, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. She thought of all the women who would come after her, who might recognize the warning signs earlier because she chose to speak up. Who might find the courage to leave because she refused to stay silent. I have something to show you, Rachel said, pulling out her laptop. She opened a document titled Project Phoenix. I've been working on this since you arrived. It's a program for financial literacy and abuse prevention. Workshops, support groups, legal resources. I think you could help a lot of people, Sophia. When you're ready. Sophia stared at the screen, seeing not just a program proposal but a purpose emerging from the ashes of her old life. The road ahead would be hard, court appearances, divorce proceedings, rebuilding her career on her own terms. But for the first time since discovering Eric's betrayal, she felt something close to hope. Her phone buzzed again, another message from an unknown number. But this time, instead of fear, Sophia felt resolve. She was done being a victim of someone else's greed. Done hiding in shame for crimes she didn't commit. Done letting fear write her story. Rachel, she said, her voice stronger than it had been in days. I think I'm ready to work on that proposal. But first, I need to make some calls. There are other women out there, trying to find their way out. They need to know they're not alone. The early morning light painted shadows across Dr. Patterson's office as Sophia traced the pattern on the armchair's fabric. 6 weeks had passed since that devastating day in the conference room, each one a careful balance between survival and healing, between professional obligations and personal reconstruction. You mentioned something about boundaries in our last session, Dr. Patterson said, her voice gentle but firm. About learning to trust your instincts again. Sophia nodded, thinking of the latest letter from Eric that had arrived yesterday, 14 pages of desperate explanations and manipulative promises. She'd recognized the handwriting on the envelope but hadn't opened it. Instead, she'd handed it directly to her lawyer, a small victory in reclaiming her power. I used to think strength meant handling everything alone, Sophia admitted. That asking for help somehow made me weak. Eric knew that about me. He used it to isolate me, to make me feel like I was being paranoid when things didn't add up. Dr. Patterson leaned forward slightly. And now? Now I understand that real strength is knowing when to lean on others. When Rachel first suggested therapy, I resisted. I thought it meant I was broken. Sophia paused, gathering her thoughts. But I'm not broken. I'm healing. And that takes more courage than pretending everything's fine. The session ended with Sophia feeling both drained and lighter, as if she'd set down a burden she hadn't realized she was carrying. Outside, Karen waited in the car. They'd developed a buddy system for appointments, each supporting the other through their own healing journeys. "Ready for today?" Karen asked as Sophia buckled her seatbelt. Today. The first workshop for Project Phoenix, the financial literacy and abuse prevention program she and Rachel had developed. 20 women would be attending, each carrying their own stories of manipulation and survival. "I think so," Sophia replied, smoothing her blazer. "The prosecutor says my testimony helped identify 3 more cases of similar schemes. Women whose partners used their professional positions to manipulate them into sharing confidential information." Karen navigated through morning traffic with practiced ease. "You're giving them hope, Sophia. Showing them there's a way out." At the community center, Rachel was already setting up, arranging resource packets and coffee with methodical care. The sisters exchanged a look of understanding. They'd both walked through fire and emerged stronger, if not unscathed. As women began arriving, Sophia recognized the shadows in their eyes, the careful way they scanned rooms for exits, the nervous fidgeting with phones and wedding rings. She saw her past self reflected in their cautious postures and guarded expressions. "My name is Sophia," she began, her voice steady. "And I'm here to share my story, but more importantly, to help you reclaim yours. Financial abuse thrives in silence. It feeds on shame and isolation. But you're not alone, and you're not to blame." One by one, the women began to open up. A young executive whose husband monitored every purchase through shared banking apps. A retired teacher whose son had drained her savings through emotional manipulation. A nurse whose partner used her medical credentials to commit insurance fraud. Sophia listened, offering not just sympathy but practical strategies: how to document suspicious transactions, build an escape fund, recognize red flags in financial relationships. Rachel provided information about legal resources and support services, while Karen shared insights from her years working with survivors. During a break, one of the participants approached Sophia privately. "I thought I was going crazy," she whispered. "He keeps telling me I'm bad with money, that I can't be trusted to manage our accounts. But I have an MBA. I used to run my own business before." "Before he convinced you to let him handle everything?" Sophia finished gently. "That's how it starts. Small suggestions, reasonable-sounding concerns. They use our trust as a weapon against us." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "How did you find the courage to leave?" Sophia considered the question carefully. "I realized that staying quiet wasn't protecting anyone, not me, not other women who might fall victim to similar schemes. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is admit we need help." As the workshop concluded, Sophia noticed Rachel watching her with pride. Her sister had been her anchor through the darkest days, offering shelter not just in her home but in her unwavering belief that Sophia would survive this. Back in Rachel's apartment that evening, Sophia reviewed her notes for tomorrow's meeting with the SEC investigators. The case against Eric, Chen, and their network was building, but the emotional toll of revisiting the betrayal never quite eased. "I've been thinking," Rachel said, setting down 2 cups of tea. "Remember how Mom always said that broken things, when mended properly, become stronger at the damaged places?" Sophia touched the golden bracelet on her wrist, their mother's last gift before cancer took her. The Japanese art of kintsugi. Repairing broken pottery with gold. That's what you're doing, Sophia. Not just healing, but helping others find their gold. There's strength in the broken places. Through the window, the city lights sparkled like stars, each one representing a story, a struggle, a possibility of redemption. Sophia thought of the women from today's workshop, of Karen's quiet support, of Rachel's unflagging faith in her recovery. Her phone lit up with a message from her lawyer. New evidence had surfaced, strengthening their case. But for once, Sophia didn't feel the usual surge of anxiety. Instead, she felt something different: purpose. 3 months later, Sophia stood before the courthouse steps, autumn leaves swirling around her feet. The morning air carried a crisp reminder that seasons change, that nothing, not pain, not fear, not even the deepest betrayal, lasts forever. Rachel stood beside her, a steady presence as always, while Karen waited in the car, ready for a quick exit if the media presence became overwhelming. The verdict had come down yesterday: guilty on all counts. Eric, Chen, and their entire network would face significant prison time for their elaborate scheme of financial manipulation and securities fraud. The prosecution had identified 17 other victims, professional women whose trust had been weaponized against them, whose expertise had been used to orchestrate millions in fraudulent transactions. Sophia smoothed her charcoal gray suit, a power color she'd chosen deliberately for this moment. The press would want their sound bites, their neat narrative of victory and vindication. But the truth, as always, was more complex than any headline could capture. Mrs. Martinez. A reporter pushed forward. How does it feel, knowing your testimony helped bring down one of the largest financial fraud networks in recent history? Sophia felt Rachel's hand squeeze her arm gently, support without pressure, love without demands. She thought carefully before responding, remembering all the women who would hear her words. This case was never about revenge, she said, her voice clear and steady. It was about breaking the silence that allows abuse to flourish. Financial manipulation isn't just about money, it's about power, control, and the betrayal of trust. But today sends a message: we will not be silenced. We will not carry shame that doesn't belong to us. Inside the courthouse, the sentencing hearing proceeded with mechanical efficiency. Sophia watched Eric being led away in handcuffs, remembering the man who had once brought her coffee in bed, who had held her through her mother's funeral, who had gradually, systematically dismantled her sense of self even as he proclaimed his love. Dr. Patterson's words echoed in her mind: healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning to carry the experience without letting it define you. Later that evening, Sophia sat in Rachel's living room, surrounded by the Project Phoenix team. What had started as a simple workshop had grown into a full-fledged nonprofit, offering support groups, financial literacy programs, and legal advocacy for survivors of economic abuse. The foundation approved our grant proposal, Rachel announced, popping open a bottle of sparkling cider. They'd learned to celebrate without champagne, mindful of Karen's recovery journey. We can expand the program to 3 more cities next year. Sophia watched the women around her: Karen, whose quiet strength had been a lifeline in her darkest moments; Rachel, whose unwavering faith had helped her rebuild; Sarah from accounting, who had come forward with her own story after seeing Sophia testify; Jenny from IT, who now ran their digital security workshops. Each of them carried scars, visible and invisible, yet each had chosen to transform their pain into purpose. I have something to share too, Sophia said, pulling out a small key. I signed the lease on my own apartment today. The announcement was met with knowing smiles and gentle hugs. Moving out of Rachel's guest room wasn't just about physical space, it was another step in reclaiming her independence, in building a life defined by her own choices. To new beginnings, Karen raised her glass. And to the strength we found in broken places, Rachel added. Sophia touched the divorce papers in her bag, signed this morning after the sentencing. They represented not an ending, but a beginning, a declaration that her story was her own to write. Later that night, standing at her new apartment's window, Sophia watched the city lights flicker like stars. Her phone buzzed with messages from the Project Phoenix support group, women sharing their small victories, their daily acts of courage, their steps toward freedom. She thought of the long road ahead, of the workshops and court appearances still to come, of the women who would need guidance finding their way out of similar situations. The path wouldn't be easy, but she was no longer walking it alone. On her desk lay the outline for her book, Breaking the Golden Handcuffs, A Survivor's Guide to Financial Abuse and Recovery. The advance from the publisher would go entirely to Project Phoenix, funding scholarships for women rebuilding their lives after economic exploitation. Sophia traced her reflection in the window, seeing not the polished financial analyst who had once believed in perfect facades, but a woman who had learned that true strength lies in vulnerability, in reaching out, in standing up not just for herself but for others. The city hummed below, a symphony of countless stories unfolding in the night. Somewhere out there, another woman was perhaps beginning to question her situation, to recognize the red flags, to gather her courage. Sophia hoped her story would reach them, would show them that stepping into the unknown, while terrifying, was preferable to drowning in familiar waters. She opened her laptop to review tomorrow's workshop materials, ready to continue the work of turning trauma into transformation, one story at a time. The journey wasn't over. Healing rarely follows a linear path, but she was no longer afraid of the uncertainty. She had found her voice, her purpose, her tribe of warriors disguised as ordinary women. And in that knowledge, she found peace.